And I also want to give you a glimpse of hope that people's opinions and thoughts and ideas and views, they're not static, they're elastic. People are a product of their environment. 70% of Gazans have never left the Gaza Strip. They only know Israelis and Jews and the rest of the world through TV and their smartphone screens. And so this is why I believe in connectivity and opening Gaza up and Gaza's regional integration beyond just Israel and Egypt, and having a rail line and a corridor that connects Gaza through Israel to Saudi Arabia, to the United Arab Emirates.
Okay, thank God all the Israeli live hostages are now out of Gaza in one of the most dramatic, I would say miraculous moments in the modern history of the Middle East. We don't get a lot of positive moments. We had the Abraham Accords 5 years ago, but there's been a lot of horror over the last 2 years. But the good news is all the Israeli live hostages are home. They've embraced their families, dramatic moments. We've had the President of the United States come in, speak to the Israeli leadership as well as the Israeli people and the world, and then go to Egypt, signing agreements, laying out his vision for peace. This is good. But we have a problem. And the problem is that Hamas now has freedom of movement in Gaza City and some of the key population centers where Israel has withdrawn, and they are killing innocent civilians. Are there Palestinians who are moderate, who believe in getting rid of Hamas and really building a new future the way the president talks about? The answer is yes, and we're going to talk to one today on Inside the Epicenter. Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg. Welcome to Inside the Epicenter, the flagship educational project of the Joshua Fund, a ministry that my wife and I started almost 20 years ago to bless Israel and her neighbors. We believe biblically that it's not enough to just bless Israel, though we are Israeli citizens, and bless Jewish people, though I am Jewish, at least on my father's side. But God commands us. Jesus commanded us to bless our neighbors, to love our neighbors, and even our enemies. How do we do that in the complexity of the Middle East? Well, that's a challenge, but it has never been more interesting than it is right now. Hi, I'm Joel Rosenberg, again, the founder and president of the Joshua Fund, and I want to introduce a person who really, this may be one of the most interesting interviews that we've done in a while, because there's so much criticism out there. Oh, there are no Palestinian moderates. President Trump is, bless his heart, he's smoking crack, or I don't know what. He's talking about building a new society without Hamas, without the Palestinian Authority. Who is he talking about is going to lead Gaza, is going to govern Gaza? But I want to introduce somebody that you really need to hear from. I find him fascinating. Ahmed Fouad al-Khatib is a resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He was raised in Gaza. He left Gaza in 2005 to come to the United States. After finishing all his schooling, he became a political analyst, a geopolitical analyst of what's really happening in the broader Middle East, and certainly in his home of Gaza. It's interesting, 2005, of course, was the year that Israel completely withdrew every soldier, every civilian out of the Gaza Strip. This was what was called a disengagement by then Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Super interesting, but also super controversial. The main person that opposed that withdrawal was then Finance Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Why? He said that if you just unilaterally withdraw without an actual peace agreement, what you're doing is not rewarding moderates. You're rewarding terrorists. You're going to end up, Hamas is going to take over, and Netanyahu, I remember talking about him at the time, he said, we're about to create Hamastan, like a Pakistan and Afghanistan. We're going to create a Palestinian Hamas-led terror base camp that's going to be a problem for us. I think he was right about that, but nevertheless, this is where we are 20 years later. And Ahmed, you've been a very outspoken voice as a Palestinian. Unfortunately, you've been in Washington, in the freedom to speak your mind about Hamas, but you're one of the leading anti-Hamas Palestinians that I am aware of. And I want you to start there. We're going to we definitely want to talk about what is Hamas doing right now and how do we get them to stop. But if you could just give a little bit of context, first of what is your position on Hamas? Because our listeners don't know you yet, and I want them to. Welcome, first of all, to Inside the Epicenter. Thank you so much. You really know how to take us right into the epicenter.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, brother, for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, speak to your community, and opportunity to engage and reach otherwise unreachable audiences. And so just very briefly, I left 1 month before the disengagement or the withdrawal of Israeli settlements in 2005 in July. And I was supposed to go back the year after. I came here as a teenager, as a 15-year-old with an exchange program. And I was supposed to go back to Gaza. But when I was in Egypt in the summer of 2006, about to cross back into Gaza, Hamas abducted Gilad Shalit, a young Israeli soldier.
Yes.
And the borders closed. There was a mini war, and it was simultaneous with a Lebanon 33-day war between Hezbollah and Israel. And so I had no choice but to seek alternatives, thanks to the support of human rights and peace activists in the United States. I was able to come back and finish out high school here, and actually began the process of getting asylum status the very day of my asylum interview in the United States. I was 17 at the time, was June 14th, 2007, which is the very day that Hamas violently took over the Gaza Strip.
Wow.
So that I was the first of a wave of Palestinians who received
let's
asylum.
Just make a note there, but if you can give us, let's pause there for a second and say there were elections and Hamas did win, but they didn't just come in and pursue a peaceful exchange of power from the Palestinian Authority, which was another option that people had on the ballot. They started throwing Palestinian Authority people off of roofs and kneecapping them and shooting them in the face. That's what you're describing.
Well, so basically Hamas was supposed to adhere to a political framework that entailed the renunciation of violence and the acknowledgement of the recognition of Israel and the continuation of the political process that the Oslo Accords had laid out. Right. Instead, Hamas wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to be a so-called resistance group and also be a government at the same time. And they could do neither well. And what ended up happening is a mini civil war with the Palestinian Authority, which became bloodier by the month, culminating in a very ferocious, I would say, 2-week-long battle with the Palestinian Authority. And Hamas took over violently a year later in June of 2007. And so that's when Hamas's singular control over the Gaza Strip began, leading up to the October 7th attack and even to this very moment. And so Hamas took over Gaza in phases and stages, beginning with the elections leading up to over 07. And so my family remained in Gaza. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My dad, who passed away 5 years ago, he was a physician. He actually worked for UNRWA. He was the head of an UNRWA clinic in Jabalia refugee camp, the biggest refugee camp in northern Gaza. My middle brother, he ran the Jabalia beach camp, the Shate camp. My oldest brother is actually in Gaza as we speak right now. He runs the field operations for a major medical NGO.
But you also have had, I think, 33 or so family members who've actually been killed
in this war,
right?
Due to Israeli bombardment. Correct. Unfortunately, and I've sought answers. I've given the IDF, I've given Israeli authorities coordinates, dates, locations, and actually one of the strikes was on December 14th that killed 29 people. It was a very high-profile one in it, and it was investigated by Foreign Policy, by magazine, by the New York Times, and never received any answers. But throughout my time in the United States, I've had, up until October 7th, I had 2 parallel tracks, if you will. One of trying to be a part of the Arab, Muslim, Palestinian community here, because I came without my family and none of them had ever come. And there were times when I was part of what you would call the pro-Palestine movement. And then there was another parallel track where I actually engaged with a diverse Jewish and Israeli audience. And that's not just, sometimes it was the folks on the left who were left-leaning, but over time that actually expanded to include folks who were center left and even center right. And I was very keen on that because I wanted a diverse spectrum, if you will.
Sure.
And one of the challenges that I've faced is that the Overton window has shifted on what Hamas is, how Hamas is viewed across the pro-Palestine movement, which grew as a tent to include not just Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians, but large numbers of left-leaning Americans and academics and people use this term derogatorily, the woke type, young people and the social media activists, etc. And people really lost track of the fact that Hamas is a deadly, nefarious terrorist organization that has its roots in the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood, that has, basically threads that, are common with the likes of Al-Qaeda, with the likes of ISIS and Daesh, and that Hamas is part of a broader trend called political Islam. So they're Islamists. They're and calling them out as such.
Just for context, were you raised as a Muslim yourself, right?
Very much so, and very devout. And my family is very devout. I actually, of the 30 chapters of the Quran, the holy Muslim book, I memorized a third of it. I memorized 10 chapters. Wow. And so there are 144 surahs in the Quran. So anyway,
that's important. Just as we're establishing context for what your opinions are, what your perspective is. I just want our audience to see and hear. We're talking about a Muslim born and raised in Gaza. We're talking about someone who came to the United States to study and to learn and then couldn't get back because of Hamas taking over and creating all kinds of danger. We're talking about someone who has lost nearly 36 family members from this war through the Israeli bombardments of Gaza, and yet someone who is, I don't know if you describe yourself as a peace activist. That sort of has a different context these days. But the point being is you're anti-Hamas, you're pro two states, you're pro getting Gaza to a place that's healthy and sane. Mm-hmm. And as we continue, I just want to make sure everybody's going, okay, I think I understand who we're talking about. Obviously, we're evangelical Christians. So often our guests are either evangelical or Jewish. We haven't had enough Palestinians on this program. We've been trying, but obviously at the height or in the middle of the war, people have been, Palestinians, Christians even, as well as Muslims, have been very cautious. To want to come on a podcast with me. But I'm very glad. I just want to make sure people understand where you're coming from so they can understand how hard it is, I think, for you to take some of the positions that you do. That's really important.
No, absolutely. And I want to just a couple of three real quick notes as we proceed. Number one is that I am not an ex-Muslim or a former Muslim. I am a Muslim. I identify as such. And my family is still very devout. I have my own, I'm very proud to think of Islam as a rubric for tolerance, for a rejuvenated way of Islam that has nothing to do with the dark ages that Hamas and the terror Islamists want to do with what I believe is a beautiful faith that has so much potential to actually help a lot of folks. So that's number one. Number two is I actually also was born and raised a small part of my life in Saudi Arabia when it was knee deep in the Wahhabi ideology. And so I experienced Islam as well in a very different sense, both in a Saudi context and in a Gazan context. And so, yes,
technically you were born in Saudi.
Yes, but that's because my dad was just working there.
Happened to be there. Okay.
Then we moved
but
back
that's an interesting context. Yeah.
It's a very common story for Gazans.
Sure.
To engineers, doctors,
in UAE,
to work in the Gulf, exactly, make money and then go back to. So that's what happened with my family. And then number three is that I am somebody who's very critical of Israeli policies and Israeli actions. And I actually make a point of helping people kind of work through where is that line between, yes, you can be critical of Israeli actions, policies, this and that, but where does that cross the line into, calling for the eradication of 7 million people? That is not critique of Israeli policy. Calling for the elimination, calling for random acts of violence and calling it resistance. That is not a credible policy or just position, morally, ethically, politically, diplomatically, and otherwise. And I feel like that's really important because one of the things I'm trying to do is to induce behavioral change on the part of the so-called pro-Palestine movement, even those who are not going to embrace Israel in ways, there's going to be tiers of it. But where I want people to realize is that there is a line beyond which it is actually legit anti-Semitism. It is violent. It is hatred, uniquely anti-Semitic hatred of the Jewish people. So real quickly on Hamas.
Thank you for clarifying all that, because I think it's just important as we go forward, people understand, okay, I think I understand a little bit more of who I'm listening to, who I'm watching. And then, look, I'm just saying to my audience, look, you may agree or not agree with Ahmed, but Ahmed is the exact type of voice you should be wanting among Palestinians who are born and raised in Gaza, because you're not, by definition, if you're pro-Israel, you're not likely to agree with every religious, political, policy position of a Palestinian. The question is not that. The question is there a group of Palestinians out there that could run Gaza and certainly advocate on behalf of the Palestinians of Gaza who are reasonable people? We don't have to agree. Look, every Israeli, I'm an Israeli, we have a very robust and vibrant democracy. That's not allowed in the Palestinian society. You cannot have diverse views inside Gaza, obviously, or you'll be shot or murdered in some way. Or that's a separate issue and maybe one for a different program. But I think we'll probably touch in this program on the Palestinian Authority. Why is the United States saying the PA can't be involved unless they go through the type of very significant reforms that President Trump laid out in 2020? You may have different perspectives on that. I welcome you sharing. But the point being, it is tough to have different positions on various issues in the PA, although it's more possible. Certainly, it is more moderate. It is, but it's complicated. It's not a totally free society for Palestinians. So Palestinian voices on the outside of the region become the voices that you start saying, okay, well, they're in touch with everybody on the ground, but what do they think? What do they feel free to say? Okay.
And I appreciate you saying that, by the way, because one of the things that has been a challenge over the last 2 years is that for different folks who are pro-Israel which, by the way, pro-Israel is a spectrum. There's different, it's not a monolithic label, if you will. But for some in that community, there is unfortunately a mistaken view that a Palestinian ally is somebody with whom I have to agree with 100%, or a Palestinian ally. And this, some people might not like this here, but a Palestinian ally basically has to submit to all of my views and ideas and has to agree with me, or else they're disingenuous. Or else it's like, people think I'm courageous when I criticize Hamas, but when I have harsh words for some of the behaviors of certain Israeli ministers or IDF policies, they're like, oh, Ahmed, I thought you're a real peace activist. What happened? You're deceiving us. Taqiyya. Oh my God. So it's like, no, guys, there's a whole thing about multiple truths. There's a whole thing about bridging the gaps. There's the whole thing about building common ground. It's an intersectionality, not the leftist woke intersectionality. I'm talking about human intersectionality. That is the nature of the world. And so just in the interest of time, I want to quickly talk about Gaza right now and what's happening. I mean, in brief, because we can go on, and I know we're a little short on time, Hamas has in fact been degraded throughout the war. They are a shell of their former self. The cost has been horrendous for the civilian population in Gaza. And yes, we know that Hamas has embedded themselves in the civilian population. And no, I am not in agreement offers the IDF carte blanche to basically justify every single strike that results so-called collateral damage, because that's my family, that's my blood. Right. Children as young as 3 and 4 months old, shredded to bits and pieces. They had nothing to do with Hamas. And again, I said to the IDF, I have a very high profile. I have very robust relations with the Israeli, political and societal and business communities. I said, just tell me why. Please go back to your records and tell me why the strike. Even if there were Hamas people nearby, even if there's a tunnel nearby, just tell me why. I want to have closure for knowing why my dad's brother, my 12-year-old niece, my aunt Zainab, my mom's family was entirely wiped out. They're all just gone.
I'm so sorry.
Nevertheless, the cost and the suffering and the horror, and seeing it through my brother's lens, I was involved in helping push for the airdrops of food as a way to randomize the delivery. And I actually flew with the United Arab Emirates several missions, and I filmed them.
I
and
saw
shared
that
them
on your X account. Yeah.
And I helped push behind the scenes for a lot of initiatives, building some field hospitals, moving some things on the ground. But I also wanted to fill a gap in the scene, which is that basically for a lot of people, Palestinian lives mattered as long as Israel was harming them. But there was total crickets when it came to Hamas, when it came to them actually embedding in civilian infrastructure, when it came to understanding how the war, October 7th, which is the worst, most horrendous single day attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. I mean, I was ashamed that my beautiful Gaza and homeland has the displeasure of having that title of being the place where such a horrendous thing happened to the Jewish people. And I felt compelled after 10/7, seeing all the celebrations and the normalizing of Hamas's agenda and saying, this is resistance. This is, this represents us. I felt compelled to speak out and say, not in my name. I was also compelled to speak out on behalf of the people of Gaza, who are all being painted as they're all Hamas, they're all terrorists, they're all this, they're all that.
Sure.
And so throughout the war,
I would say shukran habibi. I mean, thank you, brother, my friend, because I think that it was important to be a very rare voice, but when I say rare voice of moderation and of compassion, it's only rare because, well, in part, it's rare because you had the freedom to do it
precisely
as a an unofficial sort of ambassador at large of your own people and your own conscience, but you had the ability to do it, and you had access to media in Washington, D.C. that wanted to know what the voice of a moderate Palestinian from Gaza would be. And you couldn't get there and you couldn't find them. And it would be dangerous to ask them to speak out, even if a reporter did find them in Gaza.
Precisely that. And I appreciate you recognizing that, because there's just, even statistically, there's just no way that 2.3 million people, they're all for Hamas. And Hamas's popularity right before October 7th, at most, was anywhere between 25 to 33% maximum.
Yeah, we've actually talked about this early on because Hamas has been much more popular in the West Bank.
Yes.
Because it's almost like people are so frustrated with the corruption and the inaction and, I don't know, stagnation in the Palestinian Authority. So people think, well, maybe, the grass is always greener on the other side. I guess maybe the Hamas could do better. Whereas in Gaza, Hamas was actually very unpopular, and the PA was actually rising in relatively in popularity, because they're like, well, at least those guys would be better than what we have now. And so there's almost like a photographic negative image of what has been happening. But where are we now? I mean, there's a whole anti-Hamas movement that's been building since early. That's in fact where I first noticed you, and I apologize for not noticing sooner. I mean, I think I've been following you earlier, but on X. But when I really began to say, "Hey, you and I need to start connecting and having a conversation," was when you began identifying for me and others that you were talking to, there is a anti-Hamas movement growing. And they're actually having the courage now to get out on the streets and speak.
Well, the good news, brother, is that movement was always there. It was always there. It's just that during the war, three things happened. Number one is people were already losing it all. So there was a certain wall of fear that kind of crumbled. Number two is Hamas's behavior during the war of stealing the aid, the way they dragged out the negotiations, the way that they were criminal during the war itself. That just frustrated
shooting people, even trying to go to a safe zone.
Precisely, because they wanted to use them as human shields, 100%. And I would publish that, and you can't imagine the pushback and the threats I would get from the pro-Palestine industrial complex. Because I mean, even those who would allege that, well, I'm not really for Hamas, but they would get so offended when I would actually share things, because to them, there's just this like black and white, everything is Israel's fault. It's this singular black and white lane, and any attempt at any accountability or any self-critique of the Palestinian people. And it's not.
It's almost like you're betraying your tribe. You're either all
betraying
in
the tribe.
with the
This is
Palestinian Gazans,
self-hatred.
or you're out.
This is self-hatred. And it's like, no, I love my people. I'm proud to be.
That's why you're speaking out.
That's precisely why I want to save my people from needlessly being murdered because of a disgusting death cult that thinks about heaven and 72 virgins and all that, garbage that they fill young people's minds with.
Okay, let's take a break right there. This is a fascinating conversation. I'm so grateful for Ahmed to come on inside the Epicenter for his first time. This is a really important conversation, but we need to take a break, go to a commercial break. When we come back, we'll pick up this conversation, and then I'll have some final thoughts as well on how Christians can be praying for the moment that we're in. Just want to share a verse with you, and then we'll go back to the conversation. This was on my heart today from Isaiah 42. Isaiah 42, beginning in verse 1. Behold, my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen one, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit, my Holy Spirit, upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. I love that. This is a prophecy about the coming Messiah during the days of Isaiah. That was about 700 years before Jesus came. But this is the Father speaking of the Son, of the chosen one, of the Messiah, whom his soul delights in, 700 years before Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Let's pick up in verse 6, because this shows such a beautiful picture of a part of the Messiah's mission. Isaiah 42, verse 6, I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I will also hold you by the hand and watch over you. And I will appoint you as a covenant, as we now know it, a new covenant, a covenant to the people, as a light to the nations. To do what? Verse 7, to open blind eyes, to bring out prisoners from the dungeon, and those who dwell in darkness from the prison. I am the Lord, that is my name, and I will not give my glory to another, nor my praise to graven images. The Lord continues through the Hebrew prophet Isaiah. Verse 9, behold, the former things have come to pass. Now I declare new things. Before they spring forth, I proclaim them to you. Welcome back to Inside the Epicenter. We're about to pick up our conversation with Ahmed Fouad al-Khatib. He was raised in Gaza, born in actually technically in Saudi, but he's from Gaza. But now he's a senior resident analyst fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. And we're having a very interesting conversation with him about why he hates Hamas, why he wants Gaza be liberated from Hamas, but the complexities of the moment we're in, and the horror of all the what Hamas is doing now as they're killing and brutalizing Palestinians. So we're going to get back to that in just a moment, and I'm going to ask him, what should evangelicals be thinking? What do we need to know that we don't know from your perspective? Ahmed is a Muslim, but it's very important for us to hear different voices of people who live inside the epicenter. This is who God is. Jesus came in the spirit of the Trinity, sent by the Father who loves him and delights in him. And what did he come to do? He came to bring us a new covenant. He came to open blind eyes. That's exactly what Jesus did. To bring out prisoners from the dungeon and those who dwell in darkness from the prison. The Lord Jesus in his lifetime, right? He set people free from demon possession. He set people free from chronic illness over years and sometimes decades. He set people free from blindness and from not being able to speak, not being able to hear, and of course, spiritual captivity. And then he said, some of the former prophecies have come to pass, and now I'm going to tell you about new things. In this context, as I process this, while I was on my heart, is that we have seen God answer the prayers of tens and tens of millions of people to set the prisoners free, to bring prisoners out of the dungeons and those who dwell in darkness from the prison. And we've seen it happen. That's of Israeli captives, the 20 live Israeli hostages. But we still have 2 million plus Palestinians who are living in captivity under the tyranny and terror of Hamas. And we need to care for them. We need to pray for them to be set free from Hamas. And then a new government will have to emerge, right? Not a Hamas government, definitely. And President Trump says not a Palestinian Authority government unless and until they make major reforms. But there needs to be somebody who's going to run Gaza safely, better, demilitarized, de-radicalized. Let's pick up our conversation with Ahmed Fouad al-Khatib, because his perspective is so interesting. But I just wanted to, as we came back from the break, share with you that passage that's on my heart. And I'm asking with our Joshua Fund team, and I'm asking you, what are the new things that God wants to do in Israel, in Gaza, in the broader Arab Islamic world, as we begin to shift out of the intensity of war to a new era of calm, we pray. But we've got to pray, even before anything else can happen, that the security situation can be stabilized in Gaza and Hamas can be disarmed and absolutely removed from power, I think removed even from the Gaza Strip. Okay, let's pick up our conversation with Ahmed Fouad al-Khatib.
And so where we are right now is that Hamas, unfortunately, is taking revenge on a lot of this movement against them during the war. Anyone who participated in protests, the clans, a minuscule number of which worked with Israel to try to undermine the terror group. But most of them did not work with Israel. Most of them on their own. Clans, historically, they've kind of had their own hierarchy, if you will, and the Mukhtar and the head of the family, and they tend to have, you know, a lot of that, like they're like the tribes of Western Iraq. They have their own guns and their own, you know, munitions, if you will. And these are the only guys with guns in Gaza that could ever threaten Hamas's total dominion and control. So the minute that the ceasefire went in effect, just like immediately after the ceasefire began, Hamas wasted no time. They had already they started preparing lists. They had kind of prioritized which families and clans they're going to go after. So they, focused on the big ones, like in the Doghmosh clan in Gaza City or the Al-Majayda clan in Khan Yunis. But there were others in Gaza City. Hillis, there's others. There's Abu Amra. There's Abu Ajwa. There's all these different clans. By the way, for the listeners, when you hear of clans, think of just real briefly, 2/3 of Gaza's population are considered refugees or descendants of refugees. And that's from 1948. Those are folks, you know, when the state of Israel was established, a lot of them fled, were pushed out, etc. That's a whole other, the terminology there. So 2/3 of Gazans are not originally from Gaza. 1/3, they're called the natives. Mm-hmm. The natives are there. They were there before 1948, and the tribes and the Bedouins are all natives. So these tended to have more money, more properties, more influence, more
affluence. It's a little bit like what we've discussed on this program in Jordan. What you have is what's called the East Bankers. These are Jordanians from Bedouin heritage who sort of built the original Transjordan. His Majesty King Abdullah, who's a friend of mine, he and his army and his intelligence services are almost entirely East Bankers, almost entirely. This is the loyal sort of core, the way they think of themselves as Jordanians. Then you have about 70% or so, nobody releases exact statistics, of Palestinians who were refugees from the West Bank, and not just the sliver of the West Bank, but all of what they would call Palestine, what we would call, you know, the Holy Land, Israel. Let's not get into distinction at the moment. The point is that the vast majority of Palestinians today, or of Jordanians today, are refugees, or they are children or grandchildren of refugees. They have blended into the society, but they think of themselves as Palestinian first and foremost, although so far they've been pretty loyal to Jordan. But the East Bankers are sort of the hometown team that and have more influence in society, more wealth, more. So it's an actual. Palestinians actually have a parallel universe,
precisely
on the west side and on the east side.
And Gaza, Hamas rather, in Gaza, the majority of Hamas, of the refugee population. They're not of the native population.
Right.
And a lot of the Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, they descended from the natives. Okay. So, and by the way, UNRWA, and that's the controversial UN refugee and relief and works agency that provides the schools and the clinics, etc. That's not functional in Gaza right now. But historically, only the 2/3 Palestinians would receive the services of UNRWA. And the natives, the 1/3, they would not qualify for UNRWA because they're not considered refugees. So that created social division, and people would not intermarry. When you meet Gazans, other Gazans, you would ask them where you're from. Like, it's a total social class separation that I would actually argue UNRWA kind of perpetuated. And so then you have Hamas basically being a part of like this resistance terror group.
Are most Hamas rank and file terrorists from the refugee population? I'm guessing.
Yes.
But is that a fair?
And the leadership. And Ismail Haniya and Sinwar and many of them.
And that's why, not by design. Why when those of us who, whether from our evangelical side or Jewish side or Israeli side, I happen to have all of those, but when we say, broadly speaking, hey, in 2005, Israel gave back Gaza. What are you talking about? You know, that you're all occupied. We're thinking of it because Gaza wasn't on October 6th. It wasn't occupied. But when you got 2/3 of the Palestinian population of Gaza thinking, you're occupying Tel Aviv, you're occupying Haifa, you're occupying Jerusalem and everywhere else, you are occupying, and therefore we're still at war even though you gave Gaza back. That doesn't count for us. We don't consider that nearly enough. Is that a fair representation?
That is a chat for, and that is something that for me, the long-term vision of Gaza, like there almost needs to be, and I get in a lot of trouble for saying this, but I say it anyway, there needs to be an element of like a social re-engineering of our people's mindset, and that Gaza is the homeland. Gaza is not a stopping point in route to Haifa, Yafa, Akka. But before we get there, real quick. Sure. So Hamas has emerged. They consolidated their presence. They've been executing people. They have been using very, very unfortunate and deeply troubling statements from President Trump, whom I've admired greatly for achieving the ceasefire, saying that, well, we were giving them temporary approval to clean things up, and then saying, well, it didn't bother me that they killed all those people. And I'm talking here about the problematic, terrible video because they're taking out very bad gangs. Right.
You're saying just in the last few days, as we record this, Trump's first instinct was this isn't a problem and I'm okay with it. He has reversed that. And is realizing
today I saw that he put
services, out. Is like, they're actually killing innocents and they're acting like a mafia,
precisely.
Like people
and so
who
I'm
said
grateful.
Stand down. Yeah,
and I've been raising a big stink about it online and trying to get to people that we cannot let the president lose sight of this because we cannot let the Qataris manage the United States. The Qataris need to manage Hamas, not manage the United States. We made the deal. The Qataris have to keep their end of the bargains. And so I'm not saying that we need to take on Hamas as the United States. I'm simply saying that I have been, and I follow Hamas's channels on Telegram very closely. And they were literally like sharing mini clips of President Trump saying, look, Trump is on our side. Trump is on our side. Trump ma'ana. Wow. Trump ma'ana. And I was like, what? What is going on here? Mm-hmm. So there's mass fear and terror. They're rounding people up. They're looking through people's cell phones. People aren't saying things. Ironically, people felt freer to share their true opinions on social media during the war than they are during the ceasefire.
Okay. Wow.
So, and then we have a situation where Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain are very alarmed by the prospect that Qatar is coming in and going to have an oversized role in reconstructing Gaza, because it has been the kind of the theoretical underpinning of the day after transitional phase since the first day of the war, that not a penny of reconstruction goes back into Gaza, while Hamas is still there.
Correct.
And yet the Qataris are basically willing to say, okay, well, we're actually kind of fine, like getting started there, even as Hamas is there, because they'll disarm, we'll figure it out. And meanwhile, Hamas is like, we will not disarm. We will not accept Trump's board of peace. We will not accept an international stabilization force.
On that note, let me just say that on Tuesday, October 15th, okay, so 2 days after President Trump's dramatic visit to Israel and to Egypt, which I want to get your take on before we run out of time. Such a dramatic day, and of course, the release of all 20 live Israeli hostages. But 2 days later, ABC News White House correspondent Karen Travers asked President Trump how long it would take to disarm Hamas. She asked it because Hamas leaders are publicly saying on social media and elsewhere they're not going to disarm. Mm-hmm. And President Trump responded, well, they're going to disarm. And because they said they were going to disarm, and if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. This is now from our All Israel News coverage based on these quotes, but pressed for specifics on how that would happen, Trump answered, I don't have to explain that to you, but if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. They know I'm not playing games, okay? And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them, and it will happen quickly and perhaps violently, but they will disarm. Do you understand me? And so there's a lot of question here. I think Hamas is testing President Trump. They gave the hostages, but they seem to be of the mindset that by giving the hostages, now Trump will protect them. That actually now they had given away what had been their sort of leverage card, exactly, to keep Israel from coming in all the way. But they were losing that bet because Israel decided we have to go in all the way. And then Hamas shifted, probably, I mean, almost certainly under Qatari and Turkish pressure. Hey, no, if you give the hostages back, then Trump will make sure Israel doesn't vanquish you. That is a very interesting dynamic. It worked in terms of getting the hostages out, although we haven't gotten all the dead bodies out. So that's a separate issue. I'm not going to get into that in this podcast, but they are now Hamas is trying to use Trump as their shield against Israel, the IDF, and also against other clans that are anti-Hamas. They're not necessarily pro-Trump, they're not pro-Israel, but they're anti-Hamas. So this is a test, I think, of President Trump. And as glorious as the speeches were and his success was, he's got to stay very, very closely aligned and focused on this mission. Otherwise, things could they are getting very bad. You know, we've been praying as evangelicals, as Jews, set the Israeli captives free. But we've also, just so you know, on this podcast and from my perspective, set Gazans free. You know, let my people go. All right, you're not my people, but you're my neighbors. And, you know, the people of Gaza need to be liberated, not from Israel, from my perspective, although I'm fine with Israel backing up, but from Hamas, from terror, from tyranny, from horror, from real, true, sheer wickedness. But people who have guns tend to control things. And right now we're watching the Godfather 1 sort of play out these mafia wars inside Gaza City for certain and some other places as well.
Well, bless you for recognizing that. I mean, that's what I've been saying, is that I've been an ally of Israeli hostages and their families and loved ones since literally day one. I have stood with them. I've marched with them. I've gone to Washington with them. I've been in delegations with them, one after the other. And there are still 2 million hostages in the Gaza Strip. And that is the Palestinian people who are now in mass. They are done. But by the way, I have a massive network of people in Gaza. Even Hamas members during the war were fed up with their leadership and with where things are at. Because at least half of Hamas, they're not really in it for the ideology. This is a job. This is a grift. They're mercenaries, basically.
Yeah.
The other half might be actually ideological, but at the end of the day, they're all in it making money. And so it is an absolute reality that Hamas continues to hold the Palestinian people hostage to a nefarious and deadly agenda that has set the people back that has destroyed the Palestinian people's just and urgent aspirations for dignity, for freedom, for self-determination, for independence, but also that Gaza should be the crown jewel of the Palestinian people. And yes, maybe we're not going to call it the Singapore of the Middle East, but it could absolutely be an example, a role model for effective Palestinian self-governance and sustainable development without perpetual aid dependency and UNRWA and the NGO industrial complex, etc. And when Hamas took over, by the time October 7th happened, 70% of Gaza's population were aid dependent. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is that I worry immensely that Hamas thinks they have President Trump on their side. But also, this is the real uncomfortable question. What can President Trump unleash on Hamas that Israel itself hasn't done over the last 2 years, other than in terms of military power that has not ultimately succeeded in getting rid of all of their tunnels? And we saw Defense Minister Katz say, we still have a plan to, go in and get rid of the tunnels. And maybe they were holding back because they feared some of the hostages were in the tunnels. Fine.
Definitely.
But what does it look like to actually truly disarm Hamas by the Israeli military or by the United States? So Hamas feels that these statements are hollow. And I'm looking at it from an analytical point of view. I'm not saying President Trump is hollow, but I'm saying he has to have something to back up his threats. And I'm worried that he's being given the wrong advice on what it is not the United States that's he should not be saying, we're going to go in there and disarm them. What he should be saying is, Hamas isn't going to disarm them? Okay, Turkey. Okay, Qatar, you want your facility at the Air Force Base? You want the F-35 programs and sanctions relief? You want, the Strategic Defense Pact? Well, your job is to deliver Hamas. If you don't deliver Hamas and you don't deliver disarmament, that's my leverage. That, to me, is something that President Trump can bring to bear as a credible threat that I think is far more noteworthy.
I agree, though I will say something that you would be unlikely to want to agree with, and I'm okay with that. But you still have the hammer of the IDF is just outside of Gaza City, and they're not backing up any further until more things happen that Hamas has already agreed to. We're not even talking about getting deeper into the 20-point plan. I mean, now, because of all the things that Trump just said at the Knesset and in Egypt, he doesn't want to see the war erupt again. But he has a huge problem on his hands because he has painted a beautiful picture, but he might be premature, right? I mean, he is premature. It doesn't mean that we're not going to get there. And I've already been telling our audience, look, you have to expect hard days ahead. But right now, our team, the Jewish world, the Israel world, the evangelical world, is pretty happy about what has just happened. But what I'm trying to focus on, and I'm very glad that you would come on and spend this amount of time, is we have to love our neighbors. And by loving our neighbors, it means, and even you might consider, people listening might say they're still enemies. Okay, fine. The point is, Jesus said, "Love your enemies," and in this case, we're not talking about loving Hamas and giving them free reign. We're talking about people that you disagree with religiously, politically, in all kinds of other ways, but they are still human beings made in the image of God, and they are suffering, and no one's coming to help them. And I don't think it's going to go this way, but I heard on Dan Signor's podcast, Call Me Back, just as I was listening this morning, he had a guest on who was saying, what we might have to do is build a West Berlin versus the East Berlin, that the 53% or so that Israel's going to control. Let's build it up nice, and let people make their choice. I think we have to solve this problem before anybody's going to put any money. I've talked to senior Saudi officials, Emirati officials, Bahraini officials, and others, and I don't have any contact with the Qataris. I'm conflicted on that. But the point is, nobody's going to go build anything if Hamas is still in charge. And it is becoming a humanitarian crisis. And I hope people will turn their attention to this, first in the mainstream media, certainly on social media, and then throughout the world of Israelis and people who love Israel among evangelicals who were supposed to love both, because otherwise you guys are now alone and the problem isn't really solved yet. It's not solved for Israelis. It's certainly not solved for Palestinians. And we can't let Hamas, be somebody out of an October 31st Halloween, horror movie where their hand pops up out of what we thought was their grave and they're back killing, raping, terrorizing again. Ahmed, as we close, I want to give you the closing words on what you need from the evangelical community, and also just a few thoughts of what did you think about watching, what President Trump said while in Israel and Egypt. Just, I think it's important that we at least hear your specific observations on a very rare day in Middle Eastern history.
Certainly. Well, just starting with, I appreciate what you were saying about loving our neighbors and having compassion. And it's a process. And I know emotions are running high. I know it's a challenge. I know that there are some horrible things that have happened out of Gaza, but also have happened to Gaza. And I ask the evangelical community to have compassion for the suffering of the people of the Strip who were paying the price for a war that they did not start and were largely powerless to stop. And I also want to give you a glimpse of hope that people's opinions and thoughts and ideas and views, they're not static, they're elastic. People are a product of their environment. 70% of Gazans have never left the Gaza Strip. They only know Israelis and Jews and the rest of the world through TV and their smartphone screens. And so this is why I believe in connectivity and opening Gaza up and Gaza's regional integration beyond just Israel and Egypt, and having a rail line and a corridor that connects Gaza through Israel to Saudi Arabia, to the United Arab Emirates, fiber optics, Gaza of the future, digital. Not just everybody thinks about Gaza's renaissance in terms of beachfront properties. That's only going to benefit a small number of people. I'm thinking about a true renaissance that fundamentally reshape the mindset of the people. So change can and will happen, God willing. What I would love from the evangelical community is to think about solving peace and solving this issue as something that is fundamental to Israel's well-being. This conflict cannot be managed. It cannot be put on the back burner. You cannot build an even bigger wall and expect things to be fine and kick the can down the road. And the evangelical community has, I would argue, an oversized role to play, because they are one of the most influential and one of the most critical players in this space. I mean, look at GHF and how that came about and how that
more fed. Friends, absolutely.
Despite all the controversies, despite all the lives that were lost and the issues with it fed a lot of people. Okay. Like, it kept a lot of mouths fed, and God bless him for that. And so what I believe is that President Trump, with sustained engagement, enthusiasm, and a sense that his out of the box thinking can pay off, I actually think he can achieve a breakthrough where none could have in the past. And that's where an alliance between the evangelical community to push President Trump to really make a difference in the lives of the Palestinian people, both from a compassionate point of view, but also from like an Israeli self-interested point of view. Radical pragmatism. Those are my values. Radical pragmatism, rejection of violence, the embrace of multiple truths. I genuinely believe that Gaza can be ground zero for the rejuvenation and the reestablishment of the Palestinian national identity, the Palestinian national movement. What is it like? And that's something that I want to embark on. What does it mean to be Palestinian? How is it different than being a Jordanian or a Syrian or a Lebanese? What does it mean to be pro-peace?
Well, it's a pretty rough brand, I have to say, after 8 decades, and certainly since the rise of Yasser Arafat in the late or mid 1960s, 67
And the
forward.
meddling of Arabs and the Soviets and the Islamists. So like we've had pan-Arabism of Abdel Nasser. We've had the secularism of the PLO. We've had the Marxism and leftism and Sovietism of the PFLP. And then now we have the Islamism of Hamas. We've had all of these different ideologies, but we've never had, in my personal view, a truly organic, self-led Palestinian movement. And now we have the wokesters and the leftists in academia and in the media.
Well, what we haven't seen is the, dare I say it, the Martin Luther King Jr. of the Palestinian movement yet. We haven't seen the charismatic Palestinian who says, no, this is, you're emerging and there are other voices emerging. And I'd love you to point us to other people we ought to be talking to. But right now, and I've said this for years, I think well before October 7th, but I would say the Palestinians are the loneliest people on the planet. Some of that is of their own making, but not all of it. And regardless, the question is, I think there are many Palestinians who want to go forward, but we haven't seen leaders emerge. We've seen analysts emerge. We've seen journalists emerge. We've seen some other types of
representatives. A representative is different than a leader. A representative is like, okay, here's the sentiment. I'm going to pick up the sentiments and represent them. And, a leader is a Sadat. A leader tells his people what they're uncomfortable hearing, what they don't want to hear. But I'll conclude with,
and have the strength to unify and bring people forward rather than just, being a commentator, which is important. But the question, I've been to Cairo. I was invited by President El-Sisi to meet with him. But then he said, now you are meeting Jihan Sadat, the widow of Sadat. This was a number of years ago now. And I said, well, no, we didn't know that was possible. So he tells his staff to pick up the phone, and we went over to Sadat's home, and we had tea with Mrs. Sadat. And she said, this is the living room where he plotted the invasion of Israel on Yom Kippur. And this is the same living room that you're sitting in right now, where he said, it's time for me to go to Jerusalem and offer my hand of peace. And what an amazing opportunity for a group of evangelicals. I think there was 10 of us on this first delegation that I ever led. But yes, there is, but people would say, oh, well, Sadat was murdered for it. Yeah, this is the risk. This is the risk, and it's true of Yitzhak Rabin. It's a tough case, and especially if you're a Palestinian. Close, if you would, and I thank you for sharing some of the things that you want evangelicals specifically to know. But just close with some top of your head takeaways of Trump's visit to the region, and we'll close on that. If you would.
I think President
we need
Trump,
to talk more. So this will not be the end of this conversation.
Absolutely. I'm more than happy to talk again. I think President Trump, my only concern about President Trump, and this is chatter that I'm picking up behind the scenes and they'll never admit it in public, but the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Bahrainis are feeling a little bit sidelined, and that Qatar, the United States, has offered too many concessions to Qatar. Now, that might have been a brilliant strategy to get the living hostages out from underneath Hamas's grip.
He needs to pivot,
But
that's on the front page of Israel Hayom, Israel's biggest newspaper. Saudi officials on background, or maybe deep background, talking about that is a lead story right now. On
Interesting. The chatter began as soon as the deal. The chatter began as soon as it was decided who would show up at the Sharm el-Sheikh Peace Summit. And if you look at the Emirati and the Saudi delegations, no disrespect to those who were sent, but it was not representative of the heavyweight commitment.
The Abraham Accords major leaders did not attend. And whether that was on purpose because they want private attention, personal attention, which President Trump gave them earlier this year. But you're right that it's sort of the next tier of Arab and Muslim leaders who haven't yet stepped forward and said, I'm with you, President Trump. I want to move in a positive direction towards peace. It seems to be those were the leaders that came.
Nevertheless, though, I think that visit can be built upon for the next visit to actually either kick off phase 2 negotiations, or what I would really love to see is if President Trump himself kicks off some kind of a momentous event related to Gaza's rejuvenation and recovery. By then, we would be celebrating Hamas's disarmament, the removal of Hamas from power, the initiation of rubble removal and the reconstruction process, and the appointment of a new transitional governance infrastructure. And I think if we get to that place, and God willing, we will, inshallah we will, I am really hopeful that President Trump is there this time, marshaling all the regional leaders into this is the moment that we can actually use. Now let's talk about what does solving the West Bank look like so that we have that pathway toward a statehood that the Saudis need, because I believe we must achieve Saudi-Israeli normalization during the Trump second term. We absolutely must. I think only he can make it happen.
Well, I agree, and I think, and having spent hours and hours and hours as the only Israeli citizen who has ever met publicly with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, I feel bullish about that. Certainly, now that we're past the intense fighting in Gaza, it's going to take some time, but I think we're heading in that direction. All right, I said it was the last question, but it's almost a yes or no, but it doesn't have to be quite a yes or no. But do you want to serve in some sort of Palestinian technocratic, let's fix Gaza government? Or do you prefer to be a voice on the outside? Because there'll certainly be a need for both. But I'll end on that question.
Certainly. I don't really have, for the time being, I've never envisioned having political aspirations in the Palestinian territories. I'm an American citizen right now. I'm proud to be an American. And at the same time, I want to serve my people. I feel the calling. And I think for the time being on the outside perhaps is the most effective way to do so. But should there be an actually effective and meaningful way to do so, I will go wherever God directs me to be at this point.
Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, senior resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, focusing on what's happening in the Middle East, and particularly the current, the past, the present, and the future of Gaza. Thank you. Thank you for coming on Inside the Epicenter. I hope this is the beginning of, well, as they say at the end of the Casablanca, the beginning of a beautiful friendship, as well as you being an important voice that more evangelicals need to be aware of. You rightly identify this community as the most important pro-Israel voice, certainly in the United States, but even worldwide, and a very influential one. And yet at the same time, we do have commands from Jesus, our Savior, to love Israel's neighbors as well, and all people. And so one of the things I try to do is say, okay, I'm a proud Jew, I'm a proud Israeli, a proud American, and I love Jesus. So the question I have is, how do I live that way that doesn't abandon our own security needs and other needs in Israel, but truly is thinking about a broader, I would say, New Testament foreign policy of how do we make things better? There are tens of thousands of orphans now in Gaza. How could the nonprofit that I run, the Joshua Fund, how could we be helpful? Well, we can't go in there if there isn't security. And if the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is shutting down, what other options are there? So lots of questions, and I think it's an important conversation. And I'm very grateful to have you on today's program.
Bless you, my brother. Thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Well, I'm really grateful for Ahmed to spend time, this much time, talking about issues that are so critical, and I appreciate his heart. Obviously, he's a Muslim. I'm an evangelical from a Jewish background. We're not going to see the same theologically, but we are looking for people who are like-minded in terms of wanting to defeat Hamas and create a new era of freedom and security and quiet and calm and de-radicalization in Gaza. And Ahmed's voice is important. I've been paying attention to it for quite a while now, and I thought it's time to introduce you to Ahmed. You may not agree with everything he said. We didn't get into his perspective on two states. He's a strong two-state solution person. You saw it on the poster behind him. So there's more to talk about. And but the point is not that you agree with everything that he said, but I think you'll find yourself, and I think as you share this with family and friends, a lot of people have never heard a Muslim, Palestinian, Gazan voice that hates Hamas and is looking for a new day of freedom, a new birth of freedom in Gaza. Many people have said to me over the years, as I've spoken around the United States and Canada and around the world, there's no Palestinians from Gaza who are serious about peace or freedom or quiet or coexistence with Israel. That's a pipe dream. It's not. But how would somebody in Gaza speak without fear of being executed and tortured by Hamas? How would a Palestinian moderate speak? So I don't want to overstate. Time will tell how many Palestinian moderates there are in Gaza. Has the last 2 years of war created a new movement of violent jihadists who are so embittered and enraged against Israel that they want to commit another October 7th again and again and again and again? That's what Hamas says they're going to do, and they seem to have recruited a lot of people onto their team. But the question is there a whole group of people who said Hamas has led us to ruin? Ahmed says yes. And we'll talk to him more in the future about the other voices in Gaza who have been speaking and some who are getting ready to speak. So let's see. Let's not be Pollyannish about it. Let's not look at Gaza, of course, through rose-colored glasses, but let's not be cynics. You can be a skeptic. I've got a lot of caution about how to find and put into place Palestinians who really could lead Gaza into a better place. But I don't want to be a cynic. I believe God can do it. I believe God will do it. I'm hopeful that he'll do it. So there are a lot of challenges there. In terms of how to help orphans in Gaza, that's an interesting conversation. Why don't you be praying about that? Obviously, from our perspective, we want to make sure that we show unconditional love, that no orphan, if they were to be part of some sort of ministry that we would fund and support and encourage, we don't have the expertise to run something like that in Gaza, but we can work with Palestinian Christians and others who do. Obviously, we wanted to have unconditional love, that you wouldn't be cared for, in return for becoming a believer in Jesus. But we also believe that Jesus loves the people of Gaza as he loves the people of Israel and elsewhere. And we want people to know the good news and have religious freedom to make their own choices about who God is and whether they're going to even have the freedom to read a Bible, even to have a Bible and make their own choices. So lots to pray about, lots to think about, but we need to land the plane here. Thank you so much for listening. And I want to encourage you to be not only praying, but if you can make a donation to the Joshua Fund, we'd really appreciate it. There's a lot of huge needs right now. And as we head towards the end of 2025, the needs are growing. Now that the war is over, the needs are growing because there's a lot of recovery that has to happen and a lot of ministry opportunities that we want to respond to, but don't always have the money right in front of us to do it. So we'd appreciate your help. You can go to joshuafund.com. Again, joshuafund.com. There's a big donate button in the top right-hand corner. You can go there. When you click it, it doesn't mean you have donated. It means you have an opportunity to understand how to donate. We'd appreciate it if you could commit on a monthly basis, $50, $75, $100 or more per month. That really helps us know that you're with us for the longer haul and helps us to do our planning. If you can only give a one-time donation, we would be grateful for that as well, of course. And as you know, we're a ministry to bless Israel and her neighbors. So we are blessing and working with Christians to care for Palestinians as well as Israelis and others. So go to joshuafund.com to make a donation. And we mentioned a few different elements of what's going on. We're going to put some things into the show notes so you have more context to this conversation and some biographical information on Ahmed. Thank you so much. We've seen a huge miracle of getting all these 20 live hostages out. This is big. The president's visit to the region was a very important trip. He gave a very important speech, and I think generally I'm positive, I'm bullish about where we're going. But but there's a lot of challenges ahead, and I hope you heard that from a perspective you don't always get to hear. Well, for the board, for the staff of the Joshua Fund, for our podcast team, thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe. Please be sure to hit like. Please give us your comments and ask questions that you want us to answer. And please come back for the next episode of Inside the Epicenter.
I'm Joel Rosenberg. On your left, you'll find some videos we've chosen specifically for you. We look forward to partnering with you to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus.